What if your neighbor, your friend, or even the person sitting next to you in church suddenly turned into your executioner? Between April and July 1994, Rwanda descended into one of the fastest, most brutal genocides in modern history. In just 100 days, nearly 1 million people were slaughtered. Men, women, and children. But how could an entire nation unravel so quickly? Who lit the match that ignited this firestorm of hatred? And most importantly, why did the world stand by and watch? Long before the killing began, the roots of division had been planted. The Rwandan people were split into two main groups, the Hutu majority and the Tutsi minority. But this division wasn't born from the people themselves. It was deepened by colonial powers who favored the Tutsi and oppressed the Hutu, creating a cycle of resentment that simmered for decades. What started as political manipulation would eventually become the foundation for mass slaughter. By the early 1990s, Rwanda was a country on the brink. Civil war raged between the Hutu-led government and the Tutsi rebels of the Rwandan Patriotic Front. Propaganda spread like poison. Radio broadcasts and extremist politicians painted the Tutsi as cockroaches, convincing ordinary citizens that their neighbors were enemies to be exterminated. Fear and hate became a daily meal, preparing the population for what was to come. On April 6, 1994, the plane carrying Rwanda's president, Juvenal Habyarimana, was shot down within hours. Chaos erupted. Extremists blamed the Tutsi and immediately unleashed their plan. Roadblocks went up, lists of names were checked, and the slaughter began, not just by soldiers, but by civilians armed with machetes, clubs, and even farming tools. Imagine this. Families who had lived side by side for generations suddenly turned on each other. Teachers killed their students. Priests betrayed their congregations. Husbands killed their Tutsi wives to prove loyalty to the Hutu cause. The streets were filled with screams, and rivers overflowed with bodies. Humanity itself seemed to vanish overnight. One of the deadliest weapons wasn't a gun or a machete. It was the radio. The infamous radio television Libre de Mille Collines spread instructions for killing, broadcasting names and addresses of those to be hunted down. It mocked the victims, dehumanized them, and encouraged ordinary people to commit unspeakable acts. This was genocide organized through sound waves. The killings were relentless. In just 100 days, an estimated 800,000 to 1 million people were murdered. Most of them Tutsi, but also moderate Hutus who opposed the violence. Entire villages were wiped out. Mothers died clutching their children. No one was spared. It was one of the fastest, most efficient genocides in history. An industrial-scale slaughter without the machinery of Auschwitz, but with the same cruelty of intent. And where was the world? The United Nations had peacekeepers on the ground, but their mandate was weak, their numbers too few. Western powers hesitated, unwilling to call it genocide, because that word carried responsibility. While Rwandans begged for help, the world debated politics and definitions. By the time international forces finally acted, the rivers of Rwanda had already turned red. The genocide only stopped when the Rwandan Patriotic Front, led by Paul Kagame, seized control of the country in July 1994. But by then, the damage was irreversible. The survivors were left with haunted memories, broken families, and unhealed wounds. Rwanda itself was left to rebuild from ashes, carrying the weight of what the world refused to prevent. The Rwandan Genocide is not just a story of Rwanda. It is a warning to humanity. It shows how propaganda can poison minds, how fear can turn neighbors into killers, and how silence from the international community can cost millions of lives. Never again has been promised many times in history, but in 1994, it failed. As we look back on those 100 days of slaughter, we must ask ourselves, what would we have done? Would we have stood up against the tide of hatred, or stayed silent, like much of the world did? The Rwandan Genocide is more than history. It is a mirror reflecting what happens when division, hatred, and indifference go unchallenged. If we truly believe in never again, then remembering Rwanda is not enough. We must act whenever injustice begins, before it's too late.